let me tell you, so this is kind of appropriate because Mary Ann being from Warren, Ohio, there is the next person or guys that I want to introduce. They are, by the way, each one of these posters that are up here are available for purchase, and the proceeds will go to Mary Ann Perinchek. So look around. If you see yourself, step up. So quite honestly, you think about what Mary Ann just said, and it drives to heart what these two guys have done. And I'm going to let them talk about, this is the first time that this book has come out. I was on the phone with Jay Leno 3 days ago, and he said, hey, I did the forward in that. How did you get it? I said, well, I just know people. But I want to thank Darryl and Stephen, because this talks about, and I'll let them talk about, why Southern California is so important to the automobile hobby. This is all about it. Step up. Stephen, Darryl, I mean, they look like actors, but they're really authors. Okay, so you have, this is the first time out for this book, and they are going to do a book signing. Their formal book signing is May 9th in Los Angeles. So without, again, further ado, let me introduce Darryl.
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you for your very kind introduction. It's great to be here. This is the first talk we've done about the book, which the release is actually next Tuesday, the national release for the book. But let me tell you a little bit about where the book kind of came from, the origins of it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key features in it. And then Stephen, my colleague, will talk a little bit about some of the major important people in it. And I know he'll put an emphasis on Earl C. Anthony, which probably that will be of interest to you. I'm one of the few people who is an automobile dealer as well as a professional historian. I was recruited from the University of Wisconsin Department of History, my wife and I, to come to Los Angeles to teach me at UCLA and her at USC. And we stayed together for all these years, despite that. And I was happily doing my work in the Department of History and in the Institute of Industrial Relations, working on the Graduate School of Management on industrial relations issues. When the Rodney King riots occurred, and all of Los Angeles was really in a very, very bad shape, and my father-in-law's businesses on Figueroa Street, the historic Auto Row, came to be really in trouble. Most of the buildings were boarded up, and it was very, very difficult. And he found out he was terminally ill with cancer. And this was a situation where, you call upon your son-in-law because you don't have anyone else to come and help. And I agreed to go downtown to see what I could do to help turn things around. And I did it for a year, and then I did it for another year, and then I was in deep. So I stayed with it, and I worked to try to reorganize the Figueroa Quarter into the historic Auto Row that it had been, and made a lot of progress in that. I was in my office at Felix Chevrolet one afternoon, and I got a phone call from the California New Car Dealers Association in Sacramento. It's our dealer trade group that we have, and I was a president of that organization and on the board of directors for 25 years. And they said, oh, Darryl, we're cleaning out the offices in the back, and we found a bunch of boxes with old stuff in it that we were going to throw away. And someone said, you better check with Darryl because he's a historian. So I flew up to Sacramento, and I got there and I looked at them, and what did I see? Oversized books, bound, minutes of the meeting, the Motor Car Dealers Association of 1905 to 1920. The minutes of the meeting. Earl Anthony was the first secretary elected in 1905, just to let you know. Automobile show, all the yearly reports from the auto show, which was started by the automobile dealers, by the way, and all of their reports. And so I took these documents and I had them deposited in the National History Museum in the Seaver Center, and we We donated $30,000 to preserve all those documents and to process them, and historians have started to use them now. So that's how we got involved in this process. I started to do this work, and I started for these primary documents, and I found that there was no other book in the country that talked about how automobile merchandising took place in the first 3 decades of our industry. Nothing. I was surprised. So that's what our book is. It's the first study of how automobiles were sold and merchandised in an urban area, and that urban area is Los Angeles and so on. I brought Stephen in to help with me because he's the author of many books, many of which that I have read, and they're wonderful books. And I had written such a long piece because I didn't want to leave anything out, that it was way, way, way too big. And I wanted to create a book that would have 150 beautiful images in it, as it does have, images that hardly anyone has ever seen. And in order to do that, I wanted to put in sidebars about interesting people like Anthony and other people into the book. So Stephen worked with me on that and made a much better, made a much better book out of it, and he's here to talk about some of the things too. So I'm going to give you just kind of an overview of some of the key points that Stephen's going to talk about. Let's start. Here's the first automobile in Los Angeles. It's 1897, and there it is. It's an Erie automobile. This is in Boyle Heights. Now take a look at this. This is, if you took that Erie and looked at it on the left, that's what it would look like. And now notice Earl Anthony's. Can you see this over here? Now if you look over here, you see Earl Anthony's, what he built when he was 17 years old the same year. And you see the similarities between the two. Isn't that interesting? Essentially, what do you have here? You have a wagon. You have a wagon. You have a bicycle wheels. You have some kind of a motor of some sort. This is electric. You have some sort of a steering device. I'm not sure exactly how this works. But that's it. That's an automobile. And you see the same thing done essentially by So essentially, what automobiles were they were assembled from wagons, wheels, and some engine and some kind of a steering device. That's how they were made. That's what they were. And here's where they started, on Main Street in Los Angeles. Bicycles. Bicycle owners, those are the ones who really got into automobiles. Why? Because they understood about a lot of the mechanics about it. And so here you see Ralph Hamlin's bicycle shop, but look in the back. See those automobiles back there? Ralph Hamlin, like many of the other bicycle people on Main Street, started to get into automobiles. And see, here he is. Later on, it's converted totally to automobiles, and Ralph is driving out with his friend onto the street. And here we have the historic auto row coming down here. This is Main Street, this is Spring Street, this is 9th Street, and this is the historic auto row. This is a little bit later in time, but that's where it starts. And here is the second auto row, because automobile dealing got a lot more complicated. It wasn't just having one car in your, I'll call it demonstrator, by the way. It wasn't just having one car in your shop to show people what it looked like. You had to have more. You had to have some service. You had to have other things. You had to get bigger. You couldn't be in that little shop. I mean, now you're on Olive Street, and look at, you can see how it's packed with cars up and down the street. So think about these numbers. 1910, you're in Los Angeles, and you're looking for an automobile. You go down to Olive Street. There are how many brands? 105 brands, 70 dealers, 70 dealerships, 105 brands. That's what it was like. There were so many automobile brands at this time, something that don't see now. If you want to go see, as Auto Row moved over further to Figueroa and to Flower Street, so by 1927 there were 52 new and used dealerships on Flower Street and Figueroa Street, mostly on Figueroa, in 1927. If you want to see what one of them looked like, go to the Palm Restaurant today. Well, it's not open during the day. Go in the evening. And the Palm Restaurant, that was a Chandler. They're beautiful luxury automobile, Chandler automobile, and you can see what they were like during this period of time. Now I wanted to talk about some of the things that automobile dealers did that was different than today. The first thing is that manufacturers were really assemblers. they didn't really manufacture cars. They put cars together. And so when they started, they had no money, and banks would not give manufacturers money. There was no money. The banks got burned in the bicycle craze. They weren't going to get burned again. You're not going to replace the horse. Manufacturers had no money. Where did they get their money? They got the money from you and I. You as a customer wants a car. The car costs $1,000. We have to pay for that car. You give me your money as a down payment, I'll put money into it, we'll send it to the factory. They'll use the money that we send them as working capital to go out and buy the parts they need and to buy the people who will put that car together. That's how it was done. And the cars were set, the price was set by the manufacturers, those were the prices, no discounting was available. And of course, this is when cars were really, really in demand. But here you have a situation where the dealers themselves went to organize a funding company. Because there was no money for manufacturers, there was no money for retail. It didn't exist. There were no finance companies. Only when the dealers started doing it themselves. Robert, you want a car? You give me $500, I'll throw $500, we'll send it to the factory will make it. In 2 months, they'll send it back, I'll pay everything off at the bank, I'll give it to you. Now Robert comes to me and he says, well, I've only got $500, I don't know when I can do the rest. That's okay, we'll do a little credit for you. You give me that down payment, 2 promissory notes, 30 days, 60 days, and the dealers start doing this, that's what they're doing. But pretty soon the dealers are competing with each other on the basis of credit terms. Their basis on, well, you can give a smaller discount, you can give a smaller down payment, I'll give you 12 months, etc. And pretty soon dealers themselves are in trouble because they can't do the repo, they can't find the car, and they're really in trouble. So they start to organize their own lending institutions. And here, finally, in 1919, GMAC gets involved in it, and now you have the beginning of buying cars on credit. And by 1925, about 80 to 90% of the new and used cars sold are sold on credit. Now, used cars, what a problem. The crisis of used cars, why? Because when Larry brings in his Mercer into my Ford dealership and says, I want to buy a Ford, and I got my Mercer out here, it's my 1916 Mercer, how much do you bid for a trade? I don't know anything about a Mercer. There's 105 brands out there. I don't know anything. I can't embrace it. What can I do? Here's a guy who grows up in Arkansas and comes in 1914 to Los Angeles because he wants to be an accountant at USC. He wants to be an accountant here at USC. And so, but he needs to pay for all this. And so he knows about tractors, he knows about cars, and so what he does is he goes around to repair shops where they've repaired a car and the customer never came to pick it up because they didn't have enough money to pay for the repairs. And they got to move this car, it's taking up space. He buys it from them for $5 or $10, he takes it back, he fixes it up, he paints it, he sells it as a used car. It's located over by USC. Okay? Now, he starts selling more of these. Every time he sells a car, he's an accounting student. He writes down how much money he got for that car. And he keeps track of all these things. And finally, he puts these all together. He types them all out, and he takes them down to the automobile dealers down on Auto Row. And he shows the dealers, he said, this is what I'll pay you for this. I'm showing this dealer, I'm showing you, all the dealers, it's the same. If you got a Mercer, this is what I'll pay for it. Okay? And pretty soon he gets more and more business. And pretty soon, after a few years, he is the largest used car operator in the world on Figueroa and Pinker Street. And then Les Kelly starts the Kelly Blue Book. That's where it starts, on Figueroa Street. Now, women. Women in automobiles are extremely important. And most people don't know this. Many of the design features that we take for granted are there because women, buyers, and drivers demanded them. They were affluent, they had a car, probably. Young, affluent males. And so when these young women would give them the directions on how you get to their, sir, I noticed you're not a dues-paying member of the automobile club. You really should be in the, I'll sign up. Membership goes up. Sybil, now you're in charge, now you're the secretary of the organization with a capital S. That's like an executive director today. Now you're the secretary of the Automobile Club, okay? And we need you to develop the road signs. Now she leads a road sign proposal. All the road signs for Southern California by the Auto Club. She leads all that successfully. And now we need someone to draw up the omnibus bill law in the state of California governing the automobile. Because we don't have a DMV, we don't have driver's license, we don't have any of these things, and we need them like other states. Sybil puts together the team. She writes the legislation. She goes to Sacramento. She lobbies it passed through the legislature. She gets it ready to be passed. And she has a nervous breakdown. And she's tired. And she comes back. Loves you. And a little bit, and she goes back to work again. She falls down and she breaks her ankle. The law is passed into law. The new act is passed into law. The Automobile Act of 1913. And Sybil Gear is no longer there.
Hold the mic closer to your...
Sybil is no longer there. And she goes on, she leaves the Automobile Club. The next we know about her, her mother came to live with her, but her mother was walking across the intersection on Vermont and Street and on Jefferson and was hit by a car and died. We know she went to San Francisco and became head of the Women's Republican League. We know she was married, and we know she died at age 55 in San Diego. That's all we know. But what a story, and what a contribution she made. And the Automobile Club was so glad when I found out this information. They said, we never knew really about her. So now they learn more about her. These are some of the things that are in the book. This is the first book on how automobiles were retailed, and I'm going to bring Stephen up now. I hope I didn't talk, I probably talked too long, but if I did, I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring Steve up to talk a little bit more.
I can do 3 minutes. I can maybe say 3 minutes. I'm going to be really fast. I know you've had your lunch. Robert and Kathy and Toby were enormously supportive with this book, incredibly helpful for the research. The book doesn't come out till Tuesday, but it's unusual to do events before a book came out, but we wanted to do it because we were so grateful to how you helped us out. So I think people should know that, so thank you. I'm just going to talk briefly about Elsie Anthony. Some of you may even have driven here in one of his cars. He was born in Washington, Illinois in 1880, came to Los Angeles in 1890. A passion for electrical engineering led him to build one of his first cars. It was one of the first cars that was crashed in Los Angeles. He crashed it on the old Beaudry Street Hill. Went on to study in Berkeley, then came back and went into the auto business with his father, Charles. One of the first cars they represented was Northern, whose slogan was "as silent as the stars," which according to the Los Angeles Times was more poetic than accurate. In 1905, they got the prestigious Packard franchise for Los Angeles. To give you an idea of what that meant, in 1906 they sold 11 Packards through Elsie Anthony's dealership. In 1928 they sold 3,511. Anthony became rich and powerful, set up this showroom on Hope Street, designed by John Parkinson, who designed City Hall, Union Station. Anthony makes so much money that he sets up a startup radio station called KFI. Puts 2 giant antennas on top of his showroom. He would go on to launch a startup TV station called KFI TV, which is now KCOW. Late 1920s, he expands that showroom, this time with the help of Bernard Maybeck. We've got 173 photos in this book. This is perhaps one of my favorites. You're looking from the old showroom into the new showroom. And if you're ever wondering what happened to Anthony's old car, he rebuilt it years later, some of the original parts, some new, and he put it on show in his showroom. Thank you again for having us. Please buy the book. It's $55. I don't want to carry them home. And I think you'll enjoy it. And I'm very grateful to Robert and everybody for having us.
Isn't that great? First time here. First time here. So I had a little bit of correction before we move on. So when you needed money in the 20s, you could go to the Italian families and they would lend it at an interest. So there was always loans. As the Naninis, I borrowed money from them and, you know. So thanks so much, Darryl. Thank you so much.